What if I told you that deep snow is not merely a blank white canvas, but an open book where each page holds someone else's existence? For the indigenous peoples of North America, this book was not a mystery, but a daily survival guide. Where modern man sees only a flat layer of white, they saw a chronicle of the last hours, and sometimes the last minutes of everything that had occurred around them. Snow was their map, archive, and teacher all at once. The tracks on its surface told them who had passed through during the night, whether they were exhausted or well-fed, alone or in a pack. The wind that blew the snow over fallen trees showed the direction of the animal's movement. A small depression near the trail meant a resting place, a place where the animal had paused. Even the shape of a snowdrift could reveal where the predators had come from and where to wait for them again. Watch this video to the end, and you will discover how Native Americans turned the frozen world into a navigation system more accurate than any modern map, and what ancient knowledge allowed them to find prey where others saw only cold silence. Are you ready to discover the truth about what real observation is? For the Native Americans of the Great Plains and forests, tracking was not just a set of techniques, but a state of mind. It was the art of complete immersion in the surrounding world, where a person ceased to be a stranger. They became part of the forest, part of the plains, moving in harmony with it. In this state, all the senses were heightened and the world around them began to speak. This was a fundamental difference from simply moving around the terrain. The basis of this art was infinite patience, which was foreign to European settlers. Modern man wants immediate results, but a tracker could spend hours studying a single footprint. He didn't just look, he observed, analyzing the smallest details that would escape an inexperienced eye. This patience was not passive waiting, but an active process of gathering information. Every second of observation added new facts to the overall picture. The tracker never looked only at his feet, which is a common mistake made by beginners. His gaze constantly scanned the horizon, the edge of the forest, the tops of the hills, and even the sky. He was looking not just for tracks, but for patterns and anomalies in the landscape. A broken branch on a tree was as important as a footprint in the snow. He collected dozens of such small facts into a single mosaic. This practice fostered a deep respect for the world that permeated the entire culture of indigenous peoples. The tracker understood that he was not the master of nature, but only one of its many inhabitants. He had to understand the habits of everyone who lived around him in order to predict their actions. This was knowledge based not on domination, but on deep understanding. He was aware of his role in the complex mechanism of nature. It is important to understand that this was not just a craft that could be learned in a week. It was a philosophy of life passed down from generation to generation. Children learn this from an early age by observing their elders. They learn to be quiet, inconspicuous, and attentive. They absorbed this knowledge with their mother's milk, and it became second nature to them. The uniqueness of this approach was that the goal was not simply to find prey. The goal was to understand it. The tracker had to think like his target. Where would I go if I were in her place? Where would I seek shelter from this biting wind? It was an intellectual duel based on empathy and knowledge of psychology. This philosophy was flexible and adapted to completely different conditions. A tracker from the Cree tribe in the subarctic used the same basic principles as a Lakota warrior on the Great Plains. The scenery changed. The snow was deeper. The trees were denser. But the essence remained the same. It was a universal art of survival honed over millennia. They proved that principles are more important than specific details. The tracker trusted all his senses equally, not relying solely on sight. He listened to the silence, catching the faint crack of a branch in the distance. He breathed in the frosty air, trying to catch the slightest smells that were not characteristic of this place. He felt the direction of the wind on his face to understand where the sound or smell might come from. It was a complex work of the whole organism. This philosophy allowed them to see the invisible and predict events. They could determine where their prey was before they even saw its tracks. They read the overall picture of the world, and this picture itself showed them the way. It was a supreme skill available only to those who had completely devoted themselves to this art. They became one with their surroundings. This ability to see the world as a whole is the most important lesson we can absorb. Do you think modern man has lost this connection with nature? We would be very interested to hear your point of view. So, please write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next explorations of ancient skills. Want to know the secret hidden in an ordinary snowdrift? For Native Americans, there was no such thing as just snow. They distinguished between dozens of types, and each type provided unique information. Fresh, loose snow or powder was like a clean sheet of paper on which every footprint was perfectly imprinted. It allowed them to determine size, weight, and even speed with remarkable accuracy. Another type was snow with a hard crust or crust. This type of snow could form after a short thaw and subsequent freeze. Crust was a difficult surface to track, a real test for a tracker. Large and heavy targets could sink through it, leaving jagged, clearly visible tracks. This made the task easier, but required attention to the sharp edges of the ice. Light targets could walk straight across the crust, leaving almost no footprints. In this case, the tracker looked for other, more subtle signs. These could be claw marks on the surface of the crust or barely noticeable dents. Tracking on crust required incredible attention to detail and sharp eyesight. This is where the true skill of the observer was tested. Wet, sticky snow that fell during a thaw also had its own characteristics. Tracks in such snow quickly melted and lost their clarity. However, it perfectly recorded the direction of movement as the snow shifted forward as the animal moved. An experienced tracker could even estimate the approximate speed from the shift. It was like reading a blurred photograph. Old compacted snow was the most difficult to read. It was as hard as earth, and the tracks on it were barely visible. Here, trackers relied more on disturbances in the overall surface relief. They looked for the slightest changes in the texture of the snow that were invisible to the average person. This required tremendous experience and patience. The depth of the snow cover was crucial for planning. In deep snow, everyone had to expend more energy. Trackers knew that their target would seek out the path of least resistance. They would avoid deep drifts and move across open, windswept areas. This knowledge allowed them to cut corners and conserve their own energy. Snow cover often consists of several layers like a geological cross-section. An experienced tracker could study the wall of a snowdrift to understand what the weather had been like the previous week. These layers also affected how a track looked. For example, after sinking through the upper loose layer, the target could leave an imprint on the lower, denser layer. The tracker looked not only at the ground, but also at the trees. Snow knocked off the branches was a sure sign that someone had recently passed by. The amount of snow that had fallen could indicate the size of the target. If the snow lay on the ground in a fresh, loose pile, it meant that it had happened very recently. It was a simple and very reliable indicator. The air temperature directly affected the quality of the snow. In severe frost, the snow became dry and crunchy. It was easy to sink into such snow, and it made a lot of noise. The tracker took this into account when planning his movements, knowing that his footsteps would be heard from afar. He also knew that his target would move more cautiously. Each type of snow was a separate chapter in the Book of Winter, and the tracker had to know them all. But even the most perfect snow is useless if you don't take the wind direction into account. Ready to discover how Native Americans use the wind as their main ally and informant? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret, how Native Americans listened to the wind. The wind was the tracker's main informant, and its first property was the transmission of odors. In frosty, clean air, odors traveled very far. An experienced tracker always moved against the wind or at an angle to it. This was not just a rule, but a law of survival. This allowed him to catch the smell of smoke from someone else's campfire or the specific smell of his target long before he could see it. By moving against the wind, he also ensured that his own scent would not reach the target first. This simple action prevented the prey from fleeing prematurely. Violating this rule meant the failure of the entire operation. The second property of wind is the transmission of sound. In a quiet winter forest, sound travels great distances. The wind blowing in his face carried the crack of a broken branch, the crunch of snow, or other sounds to the tracker. He could determine the approximate distance to the source of the sound. This required keen hearing and complete concentration. At the same time, strong winds and blizzards could also be an ally. The noise of the wind drowned out the tracker's own footsteps, allowing him to get closer. He used gusts of wind to hide the sound of his movement. He took several steps at the moment when the wind howled particularly strongly. It was a tactic that required a perfect sense of rhythm. But the most unique use of the wind was reading snow drifts. The wind constantly moves the snow, creating drifts and sastrugi, dense ridges of snow. These formations were not chaotic. They clearly indicated the prevailing wind direction. For the tracker, it was a natural compass arrow carved into the snow. He could navigate by them, even in a blizzard. By studying how snow had been blown into the footprint, the tracker could determine its age. If the footprint was fresh, the wind had not yet had time to fill it with snow. If a small snowdrift had already formed in the track, it meant that it had been left several hours ago. The direction of this drift indicated the direction of the wind at the moment the track was left. It was the most accurate indicator of time. The wind shaped the landscape of survival. The tracker knew that in a heavy snowstorm, all living creatures would seek shelter. They would search for prey on the leeward slopes of hills, in dense thickets, or in deep ravines. The wind literally pointed to where the comfort zones were. He did not look for tracks everywhere, but concentrated his search in these logical places. In open areas of the plains, the wind could be an enemy. It quickly erased tracks, blowing away loose snow and leaving only a hard, icy surface. In such places, the tracker looked for the smallest scratches or waited until he came out onto loose snow again. He did not give up, but simply changed his observation tactics. He began to look for indirect signs instead of direct ones. The shape of the snow drifts around trees and rocks also provided clues. On the windward side, the snow was dense and hard, and on the leeward side, it was loose and deep. The target usually bypassed these deep, loose areas to conserve energy. The tracker predicted this route and followed it. It was complex analytical work. The ability to read the wind was as important as the ability to read tracks. It was an art of prediction based on the physics of nature. If you enjoyed this analysis of how wind became a tool, please like this video. It really helps us create new content for you. What if everything you've been taught about tracks is just the tip of the iceberg? The first thing a tracker did was identify the shape and size of a footprint, or like a signature. He had to be able to distinguish between the tracks of different forest dwellers without fail. This was basic knowledge without which survival was impossible. A mistaken identification could cost precious time. The tracker paid attention to the smallest details: the number of toes, the presence or absence of claws, the shape of the pads. For example, the tracks of the canine family, such as those of a wolf or coyote, usually had clear claw marks. The tracks of the cat family, on the other hand, were rounded and no claws were visible. These details were key to identifying the species. The tracks of ungulates, such as deer or elk, had a characteristic split shape. The weight and size of the target could be judged by the size and depth of the track. In deep snow, hooves left long furrows. An experienced tracker could even determine the sex of an animal from these furrows. This knowledge was the result of many years of observation. It is important to understand that in deep snow, tracks are rarely perfect. The snow crumbles and the sides of the footprint melt. The tracker had to be able to mentally reconstruct the perfect footprint based on what he saw. He looked for the clearest print in the entire chain. He was a kind of wildlife detective. An experienced tracker could also distinguish between front and rear paw prints. Many animals have larger and wider front paws as they carry most of the weight. This helped to determine more accurately what species he was dealing with. The difference in size could also indicate how the target was moving. He saw not just a whole, but a complex print. Determining the direction of movement was critical. In loose snow, it was easy. When moving forward, snow is always thrown backward. On hard snow, the tracker looked for the smallest scratches from claws. These scratches were always in the direction of movement. A mistaken direction was fatal and led to a loss of time. Traces are rarely solitary unless the target is standing still. More often than not, they form a group or chain. By studying the location of several traces in relation to each other, the tracker obtained much more information. This led him to the next stage of analysis. He moved from identification to reading behavior. Similar to human fingerprints, tracks could reveal individual characteristics: an old injury, a limp, or particular wear on the hooves. All of this was reflected in the pattern of the tracks. An experienced tracker could recognize a specific individual that he had tracked before. This turned tracking into a personal story. He knew his quarry by sight. This knowledge was not innate. It required constant practice. Trackers from the Great Plains tribes, such as the Lakota or Cheyenne, studied these signs from childhood. They practiced on the tracks around their camp. It was as much a part of their education as learning the alphabet is for us. They learned to read the land. Identifying the species was only the first step in a long process. True mastery began when the tracker started reading not just the tracks, but the gait. And in the next chapter, we will discover how the pattern of tracks in the snow revealed the speed and intentions of the target. The pattern left by a chain of tracks is called a gait or trail pattern. These are not just tracks, but a kind of window into the animal's behavior that reveals many of its intentions. From the gait, the tracker could judge whether the animal was calm, alert, or fleeing. Each gait is an important clue for the tracker, helping them understand the condition of the target. Knowing how the gait changes was no less important for the tracker than understanding where the trail leads. Reading gait was one of the most subtle and important arts that helped the tracker decide whether to continue the pursuit. It was direct access to the psychology of the target. The tracker knew that gait alone could determine not only the current position, but also the emotional state of the animal. For example, when an animal moved at a calm pace, it meant that it felt safe and was in no hurry. It was in no rush and felt no fear, which was an important indicator that the target could be resting or not under stress. Upon detecting a calm gait, the tracker understood that the target was not going far and would soon stop to rest or eat. Knowing such details gave the tracker a huge advantage, allowing them to take their time and act with calculation. The most common gait is a walk. When walking calmly, the tracks are evenly spaced. This gait indicates that the animal is walking at its usual pace and does not feel threatened. Footprints often form a so-called direct register when the hind paw is placed in the print of the front paw. This means that the animal is not in a hurry and is not trying to increase the distance, but on the contrary is walking at a pace that is comfortable for rest or leisurely movement. For the tracker, this was a signal that the target was not far away and that he could act calmly without losing track of it, but without rushing. Often, the rear paw is placed exactly in the footprint of the front paw. This is called a direct register and indicates that the target is not in a hurry and is conserving energy. It feels completely safe. This type of track was characteristic of animals that did not feel threatened and moved at their usual pace. Seeing such tracks, the tracker could move calmly without increasing his speed. It was a signal that the target was most likely unaware of his presence. Understanding such a trail allowed the tracker to act proactively without frightening his target or rushing. Another common gait is the trot. When trotting, the distance between groups of tracks increases. The animal accelerates, but it is not yet running at full speed. This signals that the animal may not feel threatened, but is still taking more active steps, perhaps moving from one feeding area to another, or moving in a known direction. The tracker knew that when the tracks become longer and more frequent, the target is not rushing to escape, but simply changing direction. He could try to guess what awaited him on this path and possibly intercept the target where it stopped. The animal was moving faster, but still relatively calmly. It could have been moving from one feeding area to another. Seeing that the target was in the process of moving, the tracker could guess where it was heading. He did not waste time aimlessly following every step, but tried to cut across and intercept it at the next section. This analysis saved energy and time, and also allowed him to predict the animal's behavior in the long term. It was like planning a strategy where each step was taken with the target's behavior in mind. The most important tracks are those left by galloping or bounding. In this case, all four paws leave the ground and the prints are grouped together. This means that the target is in a state of panic or rushing somewhere. The tracker knew that such tracks were a clear sign that the animal was frightened by something. His task was to find out the cause of this panic and not miss the moment. It could have been something that caused the animal to change direction abruptly or start running away. In such situations, the tracker did not rush, but analyzed the reasons for the animal's movement. The distance between these groups of tracks can be very large. This is a clear sign that the target was frightened by something. The tracker knew that in case of panic, The animal would move at maximum speed and leave tracks at a very long distance. This allowed him to predict the direction and speed of movement. He could assess how frightened the target was and in which direction it would move next. This knowledge allowed the tracker to make a quicker decision, to continue the pursuit, or to give the target time to calm down. The tracker had to figure out what caused the panic. Sometimes it was obvious if the tracks changed abruptly or went in an unusual direction. In other cases, the tracker had to carefully observe the state of nature to understand what might have frightened the animal. This required him to be attentive and able to interpret any changes in the tracks. He did not simply follow the quarry, but also investigated what could have caused such a sudden change. This was part of the intellectual process that distinguished a good tracker from an ordinary pursuer. Guess what happens if you misjudge the age of a track? Knowing when a track was left was just as important as knowing who left it. Following a track that was several days old was a waste of time and energy. A tracker had to be able to determine the age of a footprint down to the hour. The success of the entire enterprise depended on it. The first sign of freshness was the edges of the track. In a fresh, newly left track, the edges are very clear and sharp. You could see the smallest details, such as the texture of the pads or claws. Loose snow thrown out of the track lay on top and did not have time to freeze. It looked alive and contrasting. Over time, the wind and sun begin to destroy the track. The sharp edges melt away and become rounded. The smallest details disappear and become smoothed out. The more blurred and shapeless the track looks, the older it is. This was the first and most obvious visual marker. It required good lighting and a keen eye. The wind was the main helper in this matter. As we have already mentioned, the wind constantly carries away the smallest particles of snow. An old track will always have a small layer of this blown snow at the bottom. A fresh track will be completely clean. The tracker could blow on the track to see how easily this coating blows away. Temperature also played a huge role. If the track was left in the morning and there was a thaw in the afternoon, it would quickly melt. If it froze again after that, the track could be covered with an icy crust. This crust indicated that the track had survived at least one cycle of thaw and freeze. This meant that it was already many hours old. If there had been light snowfall during the night, the tracker could tell exactly which tracks were made before the snowfall and which were made after. The tracks left after the snowfall were clear and lay on top of the fresh layer. The tracks left before the snowfall were covered with a thin layer of fresh snow. This was the most reliable calendar that nature provided. In deep, loose snow, the footprint leaves a compacted bottom. An experienced tracker could feel the bottom of the track with his hand. In a very fresh track, the snow at the bottom is still soft and pliable. In an old track, it has time to freeze and becomes hard as stone. This was a tactile method that required direct contact. Direct sunlight accelerated the aging of the track. Tracks on the southern sunny slope of the hill deteriorated much faster than tracks in a shady ravine. The tracker always made adjustments for lighting. He understood that a track in the shade might look fresher than its counterpart in the sun. The tracker often compared the tracks with his own. He made his footprint next to the target's footprint. Then he watched how quickly his own track began to change. This gave him a benchmark for comparison. An hour later, he could return and see how much his track had changed and compare it with the age of the target. Determining the age of a footprint was a complex science. But what if the footprints are barely visible? In the next chapter, we will talk about signs that are just as important as footprints in the snow. An experienced tracker never relied solely on footprints. In conditions of hard snow or on wind-blown areas, tracks could disappear completely. At that point, the ability to read indirect or secondary signs came into play. This was a transition to the next level of skill. He began to look not for tracks, but for evidence of presence. One of the most important signs was feeding places or browse sites. In winter, many herbivores eat the bark and young branches of trees and shrubs. The tracker carefully studied these feeding sites. The nature of the cut or break could accurately indicate the type of animal. For example, deer do not have upper incisors, so they leave a ragged cut. The freshness of the cut on the branch could be used to determine the age. If the cut was fresh, light, and moist, it meant that the target had been there very recently. You could even see droplets of sap. If the cut was dry, dark, and already weathered, it had been left several days ago. This was as informative as the age of the track. As already mentioned, snow knocked off the branches was a sure sign. If there was a cone of fresh, loose snow under the tree that differed from the rest of the cover, it meant that someone had passed by. The size of this cone could be used to judge the size of the target. A large animal, such as an elk, would shake snow off of large branches. All living creatures need rest. In winter, many animals make beds, places to rest right in the snow. They trample or dig the snow down to the ground to shelter from the wind. Finding such a bed was a great stroke of luck for a tracker. It was a place where the target had spent a considerable amount of time. Finding such a resting place provided a wealth of information. The warmth remaining in the snow made it possible to understand how long ago the target had left. The tracker could simply put his hand in the center of the resting place. If the snow at the bottom had not yet frozen, it meant that the target had left just a few minutes ago. This was a sure sign that he had almost caught up with it. Excrement or scat was a veritable encyclopedia. First, their shape and size could confirm the type of target. Second, their condition could determine its age. Fresh scat was soft and warm to the touch, often even steaming in the cold. Over time, it froze and became covered with frost. By studying the contents, the tracker could understand what the target had been eating. This, in turn, suggested where to look for it next. If it had been eating aspen bark, the tracker would head for the nearest aspen grove. This was a direct clue for further action. Urine was also an important indicator. It left a yellow stain on the snow. If the stain was bright yellow and had not yet soaked into the snow, it was fresh. Over time, it darkened and became covered with a crust of ice. In some species, the color and location of the stain could even determine the sex. Even an accidentally broken branch or an overturned stone did not escape his gaze. The tracker looked for any disturbances in the natural order of things. Any anomaly was a sign that needed to be deciphered. He moved through the world like a detective at a crime scene, gathering clues. He saw what was invisible to others. For the tracker, the landscape was not just a backdrop, but a strategic map. Native Americans, such as trackers, knew their territory down to the smallest detail. This knowledge was the result of years of interaction with nature, experience, and constant study of the surrounding world. They knew every hill, every ravine, and every stream bed. Knowledge of these landscape features allowed them to move around their territory as if it were the familiar streets of a city. This mental map, which every tracker possessed, became their primary tool for survival and hunting, giving them a huge advantage over any opponent. A tracker could navigate the terrain with their eyes closed, relying on their deep knowledge of nature. This mental map was their main advantage. With this knowledge, a tracker could predict the behavior of an animal, a person, or even entire groups. Taking into account the physical features of the landscape, they could accurately calculate which paths other living creatures would use. It was not just the ability to see tracks. It was the ability to use the landscape to analyze the future behavior of the target. Nature became not only a backdrop, but also an active participant in the game. The tracker could accurately predict where his target would stop, where he would pause, and where he would pass. Knowledge of these patterns allowed him not only to move toward his target, but also to anticipate his steps. They understood the main law of winter survival: energy conservation. In conditions where every step in deep snow was difficult and long hours in the open could lead to the loss of precious heat, conserving energy became a priority. In winter, neither humans nor animals can afford to waste energy on useless movements. Every movement had to be justified and effective, which reduced the time spent in cold conditions. The tracker knew that even for his quarry, it would be wise to look for easy paths, avoiding unnecessary difficulties. This principle of energy conservation was the basis of his methods, which helped him achieve his goals with minimal energy and time expenditure. No one, neither human nor animal, would wander aimlessly through deep snow drifts. Everything that moves through the winter forest will always look for ways to reduce its efforts. The tracker understood perfectly well that animals like himself look for short and easy paths by passing difficult areas. Understanding these patterns allowed him not only to follow tracks, but also to predict the movements of his target. This skill, simple at first glance, was the result of deep observation and many years of practice. The tracker could navigate any trail. Analyzing where his target was most likely to go, and where it might stop to avoid unnecessary effort. Everyone looks for easy paths. Trackers called these easy paths funnels. These natural narrowings in the landscape could be narrow passages between hills, frozen riverbeds, or even thick thickets that created natural channels for movement. The tracker knew that if he followed these natural channels, he would not only save energy, but also find his target faster. He studied and memorized all such funnels in his territory because he knew that animals as well as humans always tend to move through such places. These areas of land were not random. They became key points for tracking. Examples included narrow passages between hills, frozen riverbeds, or dense thickets. In these places, movement became more predictable, and natural barriers were created that limited the path and made observation easier. If the tracker knew such funnels, he could save time by not following the target in detail, but simply cutting across and moving in a more convenient direction. Using these passages not only sped up the process, but also made it possible to predict where the target would move in the future. These narrow passages became places where the tracker could intercept their target with a high degree of probability. Everyone preferred to bypass such places along the edge. Even if the target could move through these narrowings, it would still try to avoid unnecessary risks and cross along the edges. This allowed the tracker to predict her trajectory. He did not follow her tracks exactly, but looked for funnels. These natural patterns became his weapon, giving him a chance to reduce the time and effort spent on tracking. Instead of following the tracks, he intercepted the target, knowing that it would move along proven paths. This gave the tracker an important advantage. He did not need to constantly follow the target. He could go towards it. The tracker knew all these funnels in his territory. They became not just landmarks for him, but strategic points along his path. He could move around the territory with amazing accuracy, knowing that each funnel was a chance to pick up a trail. This knowledge made him a true master of tracking. He didn't just follow his target, he created his own path, predicting where it could be found. It wasn't just tracking, it was a prediction based on deep intuition and knowledge of his territory. Moving through deep, loose snow takes a tremendous amount of energy. Each step requires lifting your foot out of the snowdrift. Without special equipment, long tracking would be impossible. A person would quickly become exhausted. They simply couldn't keep up with their target. Snowshoes became the main technological solution to this problem. This simple but ingenious invention allowed a person's weight to be distributed over a larger area. Thanks to this, the tracker did not sink deep into the snow. He seemed to float on the surface. It was a revolutionary device. The design of snowshoes varied from tribe to tribe, but the principle was the same. The frame was made of flexible and durable wood. Ash or birch was most often used. The wood was steamed and bent into the desired shape. This required great skill and knowledge of the properties of wood. A net was stretched inside the frame. It was woven from rawhide. Most often straps cut from elk or deer skin were used. This net was the main working surface that kept a person on the snow. The weave was tight but elastic. It had to withstand heavy weight. The peoples of the eastern forests, such as the Iroquois and Cree, used long and relatively narrow snowshoes. They resembled a tennis racket with a long tail. This shape was ideal for maneuvering in dense forests. The long tail served as a rudder and stabilizer. Tribes of the Great Plains, such as the Lakota, more often used round or oval-shaped snowshoes. They were shorter and wider. This shape was convenient for moving across open, hilly areas. They provided less speed but more maneuverability on slopes. The attachment to the foot was simple but reliable. It was usually a leather loop for the toe and a strap for the heel. It was important that the heel remained free and could move up and down while walking. This ensured a natural gait and saved energy. The toe was fixed rigidly, but the heel was not. Snowshoes gave a person a huge advantage. They could move through deep snow almost as fast as on solid ground. They expended much less energy than their prey. The prey was forced to struggle through the snow drifts. The tracker easily caught up with them. This equipment required maintenance. The leather straps had to be periodically lubricated with grease. This was done to prevent them from drying out and cracking in the cold. A broken frame or torn mesh was repaired immediately. Lives depended on the snowshoes being in good working order. Snowshoes were not just a tool. They were the key to the winter world. They opened up access to resources that would otherwise be unattainable. It was one of the greatest survival technologies. It allowed people to be active during the harshest time of the year. In the final stage of tracking, the tracker combined all the data he had gathered into a single picture. This process was the culmination of all his skill when he ceased to be a mere observer and became an active participant in the hunt. Using all his senses, he connected the information coming from nature and turned it into a clear understanding of where his target was and what it was doing. This moment required not only skill from the tracker, but also the ability to synthesize a huge amount of data in a few moments. He did not just observe what was happening around him, but felt every element of the surrounding world as part of a single whole. It was an art where every step, every movement, and every perception mattered. He was no longer just an observer. He was an active participant in the process. The tracker's skill lay in making his actions an extension of nature, part of what was happening around him. He didn't just look for tracks. He felt and interacted with them. Every movement, every sound, and every smell became key elements for him. He did not analyze the data after the fact, but used it in the moment, reacting instantly to changes in his surroundings. His attention to detail and ability to sense more than what was obvious allowed him to move with such precision and confidence that it was almost impossible to notice him. He used not only his sight, but all his other senses as well. Sight, of course, remained an important tool, but for a tracker, it was only part of the big picture. He sensed his surroundings through all his senses: hearing, smell, touch. In the quiet winter forest, every rustle, every smell became an important part of his work. Hearing was one of his most powerful tools. The sounds of the forest, even the most subtle ones, helped him understand what was happening beyond his field of vision. Every rustle, crunch of snow, or animal cry became part of the whole picture for him. These sounds not only informed him about what was happening around him, but also showed him what was happening to his target. Hearing was critically important in the quiet winter forest. Winter in the woods required incredible concentration from the tracker. He not only listened, but also paid attention carefully to every sound to understand its meaning. The local sounds of the forest became the key to understanding the target's route. The silence of winter was his ally. He used this silence to gain a deeper understanding of what was happening in the forest. He could hear even the slightest crunch of snow under the hooves or paws of an animal, which allowed him to understand exactly where his target was and what it was doing. It wasn't just tracking, it was perception that required complete concentration on sounds that usually go unnoticed. The tracker moved silently, wearing soft footwear. His technique was part of the art of tracking. He did not rush or make sudden movements, but moved smoothly and quietly, almost blending in with the surrounding world. Every step was deliberate and precise. He wore soft footwear to minimize noise and move through the snow in such a way as to leave no noticeable tracks. This silence was an important part of his strategy. It allowed the tracker to remain invisible to his target without attracting unnecessary attention. Time and patience became his main allies, and each step was part of a long and careful process aimed at remaining unnoticed until the most opportune moment. He listened to every rustle. Attention to sound was a necessity because any sound could give the tracker important information. He could hear a crack, which meant that his target was standing still or feeding, or a rhythmic crunch, which indicated that it was moving. These sounds, seemingly insignificant, gave the tracker a precise understanding of what was happening in the forest. But he did not rely solely on his hearing. Analyzing these sounds was part of his extensive experience and knowledge of nature. The tracker knew that every rustle, every movement mattered, and he had learned this on an intuitive level. He could hear the crunch of snow under the hooves of his target from hundreds of meters away. His ability to distinguish sounds at a great distance and understand what they meant was the result of many years of practice. It was like reading tracks, only through hearing the tracker read sounds. This allowed him to anticipate the target's movements before it came into view. He was like a predator, sensing the world around him, reacting to sounds and smells just as animals react to signals in the forest. Sounds were not just a distraction to him, but a key that opened the door to understanding where his target was. Silence was his ally, and every sound was information. At this time of year, when the forest was almost completely silent, Every change in the soundscape of the forest became a signal to the tracker. He knew that in the deserted silence of the forest, any sound, even the slightest, carried important information. This moment requires complete concentration. When the tracker literally listens to the forest and perceives it as one large living organism, where each element has its place, we see that tracking in deep snow was not just a skill, but a complex science. It required a deep understanding of nature, weather, landscape, and psychology. It was an art honed by millennia of survival in harsh conditions. Every element from the shape of a snowdrift to the direction of the wind mattered. Native Americans read the snow like an open book. This book told them everything they needed to know to survive. They did not fight winter, they became part of it. It was a philosophy of harmony, not confrontation. Their knowledge is still astonishing in its depth and accuracy today. This ability to observe and analyze is a striking example of human adaptation. What other aspects of Native American life or skills would you like to see in our future videos? Suggest your topics in the comments and we will try to cover them.